So I'm going to come to you, Claire, to begin the next sort of area of discussion, because one of the things that I think we all recognise when we got together, and we're all a bit blurry about when that might be. I don't know whether that's because we met in a pub or whether it's just that we've done a lot subsequently. But I remember our first meeting, wherever it was, we talked about, you know, the power of social movement and some of the things that I'd started to learn elsewhere, and we felt that's probably what we wanted to do. Although, if we're all honest, we certainly hadn't tried on a social movement at that time, so we weren't really sure what it was. But we knew it meant not jumping into solution. It meant working with the right people, taking our time to work on the problem rather than going, I've seen this work somewhere else. Because that was one of the things that struck me, you know, in the early 2015, February time, I think, when we had our first event at the Optic, and my first experience of Glyndŵr, who had been through this discussion, listening to Margaret, was that we spent quite a lot of time with our first gathering working on what we thought the problem was. And what our purpose might be as emerging from that, and lots of data. Do you think, I mean, that took a long time, didn't it, crafting that particular purpose, you know, talking about end inequality by a particular time, having some data behind it, getting people together around that challenge, moving from 3 angry people to, I think, they had about 40 at that gathering. How important do you think doing that slow work on purpose was to beginning the movement, Claire?
I know now it was crucial. I think at the time it did feel like really hard work because we kept going back to, but why, but why, but why? And I think I've reflected and used that approach in lots of other spheres and lots of work with other people now. But I think spending a lot of time working out the nature of the problem that you're trying to solve means that, one, we can all communicate it clearly, but it makes it simple for others also to understand what it is we're aiming to do. So I think, and it was when we got to the point, I think, of inserting the word avoidable into our goal, which was about ending avoidable health inequality. Suddenly it was like a light bulb, but there was clarity there. And I think that then enabled us to think about what we needed to be able to articulate clearly to others, and what we were working on and what we were working so hard on and why. So we had lots of discussions around the head, heart, hands approach to things. So what does the data tell us? How do we feel? And then practically, what might we want to do together? So I certainly think there's huge value in taking time to work out what the problem is you're trying to solve, because I think then it does mean others can easily galvanise together around it with a lot more clarity. So yeah, it was tough, but worth it.
Paul, what's your recollection?
Well, I think, yeah, very similar to Claire's. You know, that experience and, you know, can't we go any faster and get things done? But actually, tremendously effective, I think, to have done that. And I think it goes back to a couple of discoveries that I think we made in the process of getting to the start line. One was, I think, from the housing perspective, we used to sometimes talk about the problem being that we felt like small fish in a big pond. And then it was the realization that health actually had their own pond. So, you know, that was a discovery. And the other one was that actually health, housing and social care all had their own impenetrable languages. And that's one of the reasons why none of us spoke the other's language and the communication was falling down. So I think for me, that approach was really an eye-opener. I think in terms of actually building the consensus, which is based around generating commitment and willingness to collaborate and to share. And that acknowledgement, I think at the end of the day of that event that we ran, where people were queuing up to sign the commitment, the pledge, you know, to work together. I think that was a great technique, and learning how to get people to understand that they have the same reason for getting out of bed every morning.
Absolutely.
They just implement their skills in a different way to a different outcome, but it can be a shared outcome and can be a better outcome. And I think it was vital that that came from the group and not from us. You know, we've all, I dare say, all four of us, been party to trying to deliver things from the top, and sitting there in 6 months' time wondering why it hasn't worked, why the message hasn't got through. And this I think was the power. It showed an effective leadership of a different sort that the collective group hadn't really been used to. And I think people actually responded to that. They warmed to that very quickly. It wasn't that sort of strong, look at me and do as I say leadership. It was softer, collaborative leadership. And I think we were learning to use it as we went along.
I think that's a really good summary, Paul, isn't it? Yeah. And I think there was a lot, I'm going to come to Margaret now, but there was a lot of curiosity, genuine curiosity. And I think holding that curiosity was really important. And all four of us are very action-centred people by nature. We're people who like to get things done. And it did, as Claire said earlier, felt a little bit counterintuitive going, no, we've got to just size, as Claire described, spend some time sizing this problem. And I think that relaxed people in, because I think one of the many problems I'd had in the past with kind of partnership working, as we'd called it before, was we tried to spend too much time trying to understand the other person's system. And I think what, you know, everybody recognised early days was that we didn't understand our own systems, so we had no chance of trying to understand somebody else's. But what we did have was a growing common view about things that were wrong. And as you said, Paul, it's a really important point, that passion that people realised that was the same, it's just that it had been expressed differently, was really strong. That's a very important point you mentioned. Margaret, what did you think about the purpose work?
For me, without it, I think the movement wouldn't still be flourishing, because some of the work we did was very clear in setting out what 2025 would do and what it wouldn't do, and having that clarity of purpose. So an example was, I think we committed not to do research because there was enough research in the world, but what we would do was use the research that existed to inform how we worked. The other one, which I still use, and it's extremely powerful, because the people out there, or the organisations out there, I'm not referencing North Wales on this occasion, it's just people who want to stop you doing what you think you need to do, will very often use the fact that you're duplicating it. We already do that. You know, there's no need for this new piece of work. It's not new. So our commitment to working in the cracks, as I think we described it, it was really hard for people to challenge, because nobody can do everything. And clearly there was a long-standing issue around avoidable health inequalities. No one has cracked it. But, you know, we were determined we wanted to give it a good go and do those things that we could do, because there was a moral imperative to do those things that we could and should do. So I think that was getting that sense of our moral compass and the direction of travel was well worth doing. The other thing is that I think Ken said people were curious about it. Some people were, and some people were threatened. And I think we were a bit naive in that, although we all knew from different angles how the system worked, or the systems, because as you said, Paul, there are a range of systems out there. The system reacts to protect itself when it feels threatened, and it does that through the people at the top of those some of those bits of the system. And so the fact that we'd created a fairly non-hierarchical structure where anybody could be a leader, and on that first leadership group, and I know it carries on to this day, you know, we had people who were frontline practitioners, and we had chief execs and everything else in between. That was something that I think made people feel really, really uncomfortable. And so for me, one of the good things that came out of that period was, because we were going slow, we had the headspace and the breathing space to actually approach the different bits of the system in different ways to try to address some of those concerns. And then we had that really strong evidence base. So I think for a lot of people, the lights went on when Rob Attenstadt from Public Health Wales and Shane Hembrow from Wales and West and all of the other housing associations, I think, collectively came together for the first time to share the data on demand on services. And I think we all came away from that particular session with a refreshed commitment to making sure this thing succeeded.
Absolutely, and of course, when we, I think through your connections, got Ruth Hussey to speak, because she was the Chief Medical Officer for Wales, I think, at the time, and I remember one of her statistics being around more like you being more likely to die of loneliness and isolation than smoking 19 cigarettes a day, and I think that fits with some of the things that Claire was saying earlier. That for a social movement to work, you do need those three things affected, because we're all moved by different things, aren't we? Some of us are moved by data, some of us are moved by emotion, and some of us are moved by just wanting to get on and do something. And I think in the past, we've probably all of us put too much emphasis on one. We've wanted to study something to the nth degree, we wanted to just get busy, or we wanted to just tell stories of how bad it is. And I think those are moved 1/3 of the people in the room. So to try and get that balance, to get everybody collected, is really, really important. And I think you're right, enabling that, it did light up the room, because people were starting to say, build on what Claire said earlier, is that there's an overlap here, because we recognised it wasn't just social housing, it was low quality rented housing and the neighbourhood, the place, rather than the tenure. And there's been lots of debate about that in the housing world in the past around, is it the fact that it's a social housing home, or is it the fact of where it's located? And we know it's to do with location mainly. And I think that was one of the breakthrough things, I think, for people. That's right.